Many people dream of getting into acting or similar performing arts. Entertaining people, and of course the fame that can come along with it, is very desirable for millions of people all over the world. But for some reason, we as a society seem to have decided that if you haven't broken into the business as a young person, let's say before the age of 30, your chances are dashed. Why do we think this way? Sure, there are a lot of people who started acting very young, sometimes as children, and those actors do seem to have an easier time landing new roles, but it certainly isn't impossible to start acting and find success no matter your age, as long as you have the talent and drive necessary. And we have the perfect example of such a person to talk about today, the absolute legend, Pedro Pascal. I know, a lot of you are rolling your eyes at the word legend right now, but hear me out. In recent memory, who else has exploded onto the big and small screen like Pedro Pascal? He is truly an overnight success story, and today we're going to explore just how he did it and how he prepares for his roles. Some of you may be surprised to hear that Pedro indeed had been acting well before he landed his most recognizable role as Joel on The Last of Us, an adaptation of a video game created by HBO. He was on Game of Thrones, as well as some lesser-known series such as The Great Wall and Narcos. Before that, he only managed to land very small roles on TV or in stage plays, but it seemed that all of this practice would serve him very well. We mentioned before that an actor not only needs to be talented and charismatic, but also driven.
No one knows for sure, but best guess, cordyceps mutated. Some of it got into the food supply, probably a basic ingredient like flour or sugar.
Pedro is an amazing example of someone being driven in such a way. He's spoken about his early days before Game of Thrones and The Last of Us. The smallest of opportunities kept me going, so much so that I resolved to struggle until I couldn't walk anymore. The odds were certainly against him, but the man continued to grind and grind and grind until he came out on top. Now who's laughing? Sarah Paulson, most famous for her work on American Horror Story, is a close friend of Pedro's and commented on how the odds of making it decrease as an actor ages. Most people don't get to be in their early 40s and have their lives change, work-wise, in this business. She is right, but Pedro turned out to be the exception to the rule. As we know now, Pedro would go on to do amazing things, not only in Game of Thrones and The Last of Us, but also on the hit Star Wars series The Mandalorian. Pedro blew up, seemingly overnight. And of course, while he did have a lot of practice and certainly put his dues in as a younger actor, we still think that he has some well-kept secrets that are attributed to his amazing success.
Cut to 12 years later, outbreak happens. He convinces me to join a group making their way up to Boston, which I did, mostly to keep an eye on him, keep him alive. That's where we met Tess. And that whole crew, well, for what it was, it worked.
Today, we'll be examining how Pedro works and how exactly he prepares for each new role. As for The Last of Us, Pedro has been pretty open about how he prepared to play Joel. Once Pedro read the script, he told his agent that he absolutely needed to play Joel. He met with the showrunners, and once he landed the part, they asked him whether he had ever played the video game The Last of Us, to which Pedro answered that he hadn't. They asked him not to play the game, but Pedro decided that in order to understand Joel, he needed to experience his story.
I'm responsible for you, okay?
Then don't fall asleep. I was quiet. I checked my sticks. I looked for tracks. I found the high ground, and I kept watch, like you taught me to. What can I say, man? I'm a natural.
So, against the wishes of the showrunners, he and a few of his nephews dove into the game. Pedro has even joked about not being good at the game at all, and that his nephews would often lose patience with him while they were playing together. However, it certainly seemed to help. For Game of Thrones, Pedro was required to participate in an epic battle between his character Oberyn Martell and Gregor the Mountain Clegane. This battle was so intense and required such physical prowess that Pedro had to train for hours a day with spears followers that were much taller than him. The battle scene in question was a very famous one from the story, at the end of which Oberyn has his eyes gouged out of his head by the mountain. Yikes. While Pedro was no stranger to putting in the work, he had famously talked about struggling until he could no longer walk in his early days of acting. This training was grueling. Grueling to the point that once the scene itself was filmed, Pedro felt an immense wave of relief. It was so hot when we were shooting that scene. He's over me and he puts his thumbs into my eyes and they've got tubing through his body into his forearms to his thumbs just pumping this cool blood. Apparently, the icy feeling from the fake blood was so soothing that Pedro fell into the deepest sleep he had ever experienced after shooting the scene.
I'm going to hear you confess before you die. You raped my sister. You murdered her. You killed her children. Say it now and we can make this quick.
Well, that's honestly not too surprising. I can imagine he was pretty darn exhausted after all of the training and then shooting the scene. And of course, we have to talk about The Mandalorian. Arguably his most famous role, or perhaps a tie with that of Joel from The Last of Us. Pedro had to do a lot of work to prepare for the Star Wars series as well. If you were cast to portray a character in the Star Wars spin-off, what would you do to make sure you understood the assignment? Well, if you were Pedro Pascal, you would rewatch every single piece of Star Wars content there is in order. Jeez, in order? That must have been a real challenge. Jokes aside, Pedro did indeed complete this task. He has said that revisiting the franchise in its entirety was very important to him so he could better absorb and understand the finer points of the story, and not just the overarching plot. Pedro also noticed strong themes of family dynamics, global conflicts, and the human experience while he went through his Star Wars marathon. These realizations of how intricate and complex the story really is were imperative for Pedro to really embody his role of Din Djarin. Pedro was rewarded handsomely for his dedication and passion for the role, becoming one of the most recognizable and beloved characters on the show to date. Pedro himself has also spoken at length about how much he adores the franchise and being able to be involved in the show. Going over to the set where they were trying to experiment with screen testing different things, putting on the helmet for the first time in front of Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy, no pressure, it fit like a glove, and then putting on the entire costume for the first time, all of that was really, really surreal. As far as training, Pedro has certainly gone out of his way to prepare his body for whatever role he steps into. But apart from exercise, what about his diet? You may be surprised to learn that Pedro has never actually gone on any specific diet for a role. He tends to immerse himself in his character and train like they would, but he has never really put a ton of effort into what he eats. Famously, he's also spoken about his love for Captain Crunch and his unique ability to eat an entire box of the stuff without milk. This guy rules, guys. Anyway, we want to hear what you think. What was the first role you saw Pedro perform? Which is your favorite? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We will see you all in the next one. Peace out, friends.